Our first story comes from the north of Iceland, from a valley where two rivers run cold out of the highlands, and a farm sits on the dark bank of one of them. The farm's name, in the old tongue, means dark river. Remember that. The people who named these places did not choose their words lightly. This is a story they told in the deep of winter, when the sun did not rise for weeks at a time, and the only light was the moon on the snow. Settle in. Let the room go dark around you. There is no hurry here. On the farm at Dark River there lived a deacon, a young man in service to the church, well thought of in the valley. And like young men in every valley in every age, he was in love. The girl lived across the water, on a farm on the far side of a wide, cold river. To see her, the deacon had to ride, down from Dark River, along the black bank, across the current, and up the other side. He made that ride often. He had a good horse for it, a pale horse, and the two of them knew the road so well they could have walked it in the dark, which, in an Icelandic winter, is very nearly what they did. It was the week before Christmas. The deacon rode across to see her and to make their plans. They would spend the holy days together. He would come for her on Christmas Eve, he said. He would ride across on the pale horse and bring her back to Dark River, and they would keep the feast side by side. She said yes. Of course she said yes. He kissed her goodbye at her father's door, and he mounted the pale horse, and he rode back out into the dark toward the river. He never reached the other side. The weather in that country turns without warning. A clear sky becomes a wall of snow between one breath and the next. The deacon was caught out on the ice when the storm came down, and the ice was rotten, and it gave way beneath the horse. He fell. He struck his head, struck it hard, on the edge of the broken ice, and the cold black water took him, and closed over him, and carried him down. He drowned there in the river whose name he lived beside. Dark River took the man from Dark River. The old stories are shaped like that. They close on themselves like a hand. A farmer found his body the next morning, washed against the bank, pale as his own horse. They carried him home. They buried him in the churchyard, a week before Christmas, in ground so frozen it took 2 men a day to open it. And here is the thing. Here is the small, terrible thing on which the whole story turns. The news did not cross the river. The storm had shut the valley. No one rode across to tell the girl that her deacon was dead. She sat in her father's house through those short grey days, mending her good dress, thinking of the ride to come, waiting for Christmas Eve. She did not know. She had no way to know. She thought he was coming for her. And on Christmas Eve, he came. There was a knock at the door after dark. Her mother went to answer it, a candle in her hand. But the wind came in and put the candle out, and in the darkness she could not see who stood there, and the visitor did not speak, and so she went back inside without a word. But the girl had heard the knock, and she knew who it must be. She was half-dressed already, waiting. She snatched up her coat and pulled it on. But in her hurry she only got one arm into one sleeve, and left the coat hanging off her shoulder, half on, half off. Hold on to that detail. That single empty sleeve. It matters more than anything. She ran out into the dark, and there he was on the pale horse, just as he had promised. He reached down, she climbed up behind him, and they rode. They rode toward the river, and neither of them spoke. His back was to her. His hat was pulled low, and a scarf wound high, so that between the two she could see nothing of his face. This did not trouble her. It was cold. Everyone rode wrapped against the cold. The snow had stopped. The clouds broke. And as they came down to the ford, the moon came out over the water and shone full on the two of them, horse and riders, crossing the black river in the white light. And the horse stumbled on the bank, just slightly, just enough that the deacon's hat tipped forward on his head, and in the moonlight, for one moment, she saw the back of his skull. She saw the wound, the white gleam of bone through the dark of his hair, where the ice had opened his head, bare, fleshless, shining wet in the moon. And in that moment, riding low and quiet, the thing in front of her spoke. It said, "The moon glides. Death rides. Do you not see a white spot on the back of my head?" And then it called her name, but not her whole name. Now, you must understand one thing, or the horror of it will pass you by. In the old Icelandic, her name contained the word for God. It was built into it, the way God is built into the word goodbye. A holy syllable, sewn into a girl's name like a blessing. But the dead cannot say the name of God. It will not pass their lips. And so the deacon, riding under the moon with the river closing behind him, could not speak the whole of his own love's name. He called out to her, and the name came back broken, the God part missing, torn out of it, the way a page is torn from a book. That was the moment she understood what she was riding behind. But she did not scream. She did not fall. There was nowhere to fall to but the black water. She held on, and she said the only thing there was to say. She said, I see what is." And they rode on in silence to the churchyard at Dark River. They came to the gate. The deacon climbed down and lifted her down after him and told her to wait while he led the pale horse over the wall. And he led the horse away toward the churchyard wall. And the girl, standing alone in the snow, looked past him and saw, in the middle of the graveyard, an open grave, fresh, waiting, with the earth heaped beside it, and the dark hole of it black against the white ground. And she knew it was his, and she knew he meant for it to be hers. He turned back from the horse and came for her. He took hold of her to pull her toward the grave, and this is where the single empty sleeve saved her life, because she had only ever got one arm into her coat. When he seized her, he seized the coat. He caught the loose, empty half, the sleeve with no arm in it. And as he pulled her toward the open earth, she threw herself the other way, and her free hand found the rope of the church bell hanging by the gate. She pulled it. She pulled that bell with everything she had, and its voice rang out across the snow, across the sleeping farm, up into the black air. And the dead thing flinched from the sound of it and pulled harder, and the coat tore. It tore clean in two. He went backward into the open grave, clutching the empty half of her coat, and the earth that was heaped beside it slid down after him and filled the hole and buried him. And the last thing she saw was the pale hand and the torn cloth going down into the dark. She kept ringing the bell. She did not stop. She rang it until the whole farm woke and came running with lights, and found her there in the snow, in half a coat, alive. That was not quite the end of it. The Deacon did not lie easy. Night after night he came back and troubled the farm, and no one slept, until at last they sent for a man who knew the old ways, and he raised a stone and set it deep, and pinned the dead thing under it, and bound it there. And after that, they say, the Deacon of Dark River stayed in his grave. Think, before we go on, of that ride. The moon on the water, the wound she could not unsee, and the name with God taken out of the middle of it, because the thing that loved her could no longer hold the whole of her in its mouth. They told this story in the dark of the year, in houses buried in snow, with the wind on the roof. And perhaps a girl heard it and looked at the door and wondered who might knock. But you are not in that house. Your door is locked, and your dead are only stories, and the river is far away. Let it go. Sleep is closer than the far bank. We have 6 more tales to cross before morning, and there is no hurry at all. There is a farm in a valley in the north of Iceland where nobody wanted to work. Not because the work was hard. The work was the same as any farm: sheep on the hills, hay in the summer, long winters mending what the wind broke. The land was good, the pay was fair. But the shepherds who went up into the high pastures did not always come back down. And the ones who did come back came back changed. Quiet. Looking over their shoulders at things that were not there. The farmer who owned the land was a decent man. He warned every shepherd he hired. He said, "There is something in the upper pastures. I don't know what it is. I have never seen it. But I would not send you up there without telling you first." Most men heard this and walked away. Sensible men. Men who trusted the weight of a warning more than the weight of silver. And then one winter, a man came to the farm who was not sensible. He was foreign, Swedish, some say, or from one of the outer islands. A big man, taller than anyone in the valley, broad across the shoulders, with pale hair and pale eyes, and a way of looking at you that made you want to step aside. Not because he was cruel, because he was indifferent. He looked at you the way weather looks at a house. The farmer gave him the warning. The stranger shrugged. He said he did not frighten easily. He said it the way a man says the sky is blue, not boasting, just stating a fact about the world. He took the job. He went up into the hills with the sheep. For a while, everything was fine. The sheep came in. The stranger came down from the pastures each evening, stamping snow off his boots, eating alone, speaking to no one. The other farmhands did not like him. He had a temper that ran cold, not hot, and a habit of staring into the dark after supper, as if he were listening to something none of them could hear. Christmas came. The stranger went up to check the flock on Christmas Eve, and did not come back for supper. He did not come back that night. He did not come back the next morning. They found him on the day after Christmas, in the hills above the farm. He was dead. His body lay on the frozen ground, with the sheep scattered around him. Most of them dead too. Necks broken, wool torn, scattered across the hillside as if something had thrown them. And the stranger himself was lying on his back with his eyes open, and his face twisted into something that was not quite fear and not quite rage, but something older than both. The ground around him was churned, deep gouges in the frozen earth, as if he had fought something with his bare hands, and the strength of a man who does not know how to stop. They could not close his eyes. They tried. The lids would not stay shut. They buried him in the churchyard, or they tried to. The priest refused. Something about the body unsettled him. The open eyes, the weight of it, the way the air felt close and wrong when you stood near it. So they buried him instead on the hillside, under a cairn of stones, in the pasture where he had died. That should have been the end of it. It was not the end of it. The first sign was the sounds on the roof. It began a few nights after the burial, a heavy, rhythmic weight, moving across the turf above their heads. Not an animal. Heavier than any animal. The sound of something the size of a man, walking slowly, back and forth, across the rooftop, in the dark. The farmhands lay in their beds and listened, and did not move. The weight passed overhead, left to right, right to left, patient and slow, like something pacing, like something waiting. Then the animals began to die. Horses found in their stalls with broken backs. Cattle with their necks wrenched sideways. Not eaten. Not mauled. Killed and left. Whatever was doing this was not hungry. It was angry. People began to see him. A farmhand crossing the yard at dusk looked up at the roof and saw the dead shepherd sitting astride the ridge beam, legs hanging down on either side, riding the rooftop like a horse. His pale hair was stiff with frost. His eyes were open. They had always been open. Others saw him walking the roads at night, walking toward the farm, always toward the farm, never away from it. His footsteps left marks in the snow, deeper than a living man's, as if he were heavier now than he had been in life, as if death had added something to him instead of taking it away. The farmer sent for help. He sent for the church. The church could not help him. He sent word across the district, across the highlands, looking for anyone strong enough or foolish enough to face what the dead shepherd had become. And eventually, word reached a man who was both. He was young, barely 20, and he was already the strongest man anyone had ever met. Not the tallest, not the heaviest, but the one you could not move. The one who, once he had hold of you, did not let go. He had a reputation for fighting things that should not be fought. Outlaws, bears, men who outnumbered him 3-1. He won, mostly. He won because he did not care about winning. He cared about not losing, which is a different thing entirely. He came to the farm. He heard the story. He said he would stay the night. The farmhands left. The farmer left. The young man sat alone in the main hall, by the fire, in the dark, and waited. He did not wait long. The door opened. Not slowly, not with a creak. It burst inward, as if something had hit it with its full weight, and the cold came in like a flood, and the fire guttered, and in the doorway stood the dead shepherd. He was larger than he had been in life. That was the first wrong thing. Taller, broader. His skin had gone the colour of old iron, and his hands hung at his sides like slabs of stone. And his eyes were open, wide and pale and empty, catching the last of the firelight and throwing it back as something colder. The young man stood up. They fought. It was not a clean fight. There were no weapons, no technique. It was two bodies slamming into each other in the dark, crashing against walls, breaking beams, tearing the hall apart around them. The young man got hold of the dead thing's arms, and the dead thing got hold of his, and they locked together, and neither would give. The benches splintered, the walls cracked. They crashed through the doorframe and out into the yard, into the snow, into the moonlight. And in the moonlight, the young man threw the dead shepherd down. He landed on his back in the snow, and the young man fell on top of him and pinned him there. And for one moment, in the white light, the dead man's face was beneath his, and the pale eyes looked up at him, and the thing that had been a shepherd spoke. It said, "You have sought me out, and you have beaten me, and I cannot take that from you. But I can give you this. From tonight, you will always see these eyes in the dark. When the light goes out, you will see them. When you close your own eyes, you will see them. You will never be alone in the dark again." And then it died. For the second time. And the last. They burned the body after that. They scattered the ashes in the sea. The farm was quiet again. The rooftops were empty. The animals lived. But the young man, the strongest man in Iceland, the one who could not be moved, the one who fought bears and outlaws and the dead, he was afraid of the dark for the rest of his life. Not the things in the dark, not monsters, not men, the dark itself. the moment the candle went out. The moment between twilight and true night, when the world loses its edges. He could not bear it. He kept fires burning all night. He slept with a light. He, who had wrestled the dead with his bare hands, and won, could not sit in an unlit room without feeling those pale eyes looking back at him from the place where the wall met the shadow. That is the shape of the curse. Not death. Not pain. Something worse than either. The theft of darkness. The one place every person goes to rest, made into a place of watching. Think about that. If you are lying in the dark right now, think about what it would cost you to never feel safe there again. But you are safe. No dead thing rides your roof. No pale eyes wait behind your eyelids. The dark around you is empty, and the empty dark is kind. Rest in it. We have more ground to cover, but the ground can wait. In Sweden, in the old days, they had a rule about water. Do not go to the river alone. Do not go at twilight. And if you hear music coming from the water, do not follow it. There is a spirit that lives in rivers and lakes and the still places where the current turns back on itself. Every country in the north has a name for it, and every name means roughly the same thing. The one in the water. The one who plays. He appears as a man. Young, pale, sitting on a rock at the water's edge, or standing waist deep in the shallows. Sometimes naked, sometimes dressed in grey or green, the colours of the river. And he plays the fiddle. He plays the fiddle, the way water moves. Not like a man who has learned an instrument, like something that has always been music, and is only borrowing the shape of a man to give the sound somewhere to come from. The music is beautiful. That is the problem. It is not beautiful the way a concert is beautiful, where you sit and listen and clap at the end. It is beautiful the way thirst is beautiful, when you have not had water in 2 days. It fills a need you did not know you had, and then it fills it more, and then you cannot stop. People who heard it described it afterward, the ones who survived, as a feeling of rightness, as if the music were not coming from the river, but from inside their own chests, a song they had always known, but could never quite remember. And to hear it was to feel, for the first time, that everything was exactly where it should be. And then your feet move. You do not decide to walk toward the water. You are simply closer to it than you were a moment ago. The grass is wet. The bank is soft. The water is at your ankles, and it is cold. And the cold does not matter, because the music is so close now. And if you could only reach the place it's coming from, you would understand something you have been trying to understand your whole life. The water is at your knees, your waist, your chest. The fiddler watches you come. He does not stop playing. He does not need to. There is a version of this story that the Swedes tell that is kinder than the rest. A boy was walking near the river one evening and heard the music. But this boy was a pastor's son, raised on scripture and certainty, and instead of following the sound, he stopped at the bank and called out to the fiddler. He said, "Why do you play? You are a creature of the water. You will never be saved." The music stopped. "These the fiddler, the thing in the river, the spirit that had drowned fishermen and milkmaids and children for longer than anyone could count, wept. He sat on his rock in the shallows, and he wept. And the fiddle hung loose in his hand, and the river ran on without any music in it at all." The boy went home. He told his father what he had said, and the pastor, who knew more about mercy than his son did, looked at the boy for a long time, and then said quietly, "You should not have said that. God's mercy is wider than you think. It is wide enough, even for the one in the water." The boy went back to the river. He stood on the bank, and he repeated what his father had said, word for word. God's mercy, wide enough, even for you. And the fiddler lifted the bow and began to play again. But the music was different now. Not the drowning kind. Not the music that fills the gap inside you and pulls you toward the water. This was something else. Joyful is not quite the right word. Grateful, maybe. Or relieved. The sound a door makes when it opens after a very long time. The boy stood on the bank and listened, and did not move, and did not need to. That is one ending. There are others. In some tellings, the boy never goes back. The fiddler weeps alone on the rock until the river freezes and the ice seals him under. In spring, when the melt comes, the music rises again, and a girl walking home through the fields hears something so beautiful she stops and turns and takes one step toward the water. Just one. But that first step is always enough. The people of the Old North understood something about beauty that we have mostly forgotten. They understood that the most dangerous thing in the world is not the thing that frightens you. It is the thing that calls to you, the thing you want to follow, the song you have always known, but can never quite place. The fiddler is still out there, if you believe the stories, sitting at the water's edge in the last light of the evening, playing something you almost recognize. But you are not near the water. You are warm and dry, and the only music here is the sound of your own breathing, slowing down. Let it slow. The fiddler can wait. We still have stories to tell, and the night is long, and we are in no hurry at all. The forests in Norway are not like forests in warmer countries. They do not end. You walk in, and the trees close behind you. And after a while, the path you came in on does not look like a path anymore. It looks like every other gap between every other tree. The light goes green, then grey, then gone. And the silence is the kind that presses against your ears until you start to hear things in it. The Norwegians knew these forests the way sailors know the sea, with respect and a list of rules that you did not break. One of the rules was this: if you see a woman alone in the deep woods, do not speak to her. Do not follow her. And whatever you do not look at her from behind. They called her the Hidden One. She lived in the spaces between the trees, where the moss grows thick and the air smells like rain. Even when it has not rained in weeks. She was old. Not old like a grandmother. Old like the forest itself. Old like stone. From the front, she was beautiful. The kind of beautiful that makes you stupid. The kind that empties your head of every sensible thought and fills it with just one. Stay. Stay and look a little longer. She had long hair, dark or fair depending on the telling. A face that looked almost human. Almost. Something about the proportions was slightly wrong. The eyes a fraction too large, or the smile a beat too slow. As if she were wearing a face that she had studied carefully, but did not quite understand from the inside. And she had a tail, a cow's tail, hanging beneath her skirt, swinging slightly as she walked. If you were standing in front of her, you would never see it. She was careful about that. She always faced you. She always kept her back turned away, because the back was worse than the tail. If you saw her from behind, if you circled around her, or if the wind caught her dress, or if she turned too quickly and you glimpsed what she had been hiding, her back was hollow. Not scarred, not wounded, hollow, like a rotted tree, like someone had scooped out everything between her shoulder blades and left only the bark. The inside of her was dark and rough and empty, like looking into a stump in the forest and seeing nothing but dead wood and shadow. She was a shell, beautiful from the front, hollow from behind. And the men she took into the woods did not learn this until it was too late. The stories follow a pattern. A man is alone in the forest. He is a woodcutter, or a charcoal burner, or a hunter who has wandered farther from the village than he meant to. The light is fading. He is thinking about the path home, and then he sees her. She is standing between two birch trees, watching him. She smiles. She does not speak, not at first. She tilts her head, the way a bird does when it is deciding whether something is food. And then she turns, slowly, keeping her front toward him, and walks deeper into the trees. She looks back over her shoulder. Come. And his feet follow. Not because he decides to, because some part of him, the part that is older than reason, older than caution, The part that has been lonely for so long. It has forgotten what lonely feels like. That part says, yes. The men who came back, and not all of them came back, could never say exactly what happened. Time moved strangely in the deep woods. A night felt like an hour. A week felt like a night. They remembered warmth, and her voice, and the feeling that the forest was a room, and the room was hers. The ones who escaped because they saw the tail, or the back. Something broke the spell. A gust of wind, a stumble, a moment when she forgot herself and turned the wrong way. And in that moment, the beauty collapsed, and the man saw what he was really standing next to, and the fear hit him like cold water, and he ran. The ones who did not see it were never seen again. Their families searched. They found nothing. No body, no clothing, no sign that anyone had ever been there at all. The forest closed over them, the way water closes over a stone. There is one more thing. In some versions of the story, a man could marry the hidden woman in a church, and if he did, the tail fell away, and she became fully human. But she gained something in the exchange: superhuman strength, and a temper like a winter storm. They say a woman in a village in the west of Norway once lifted a full-grown ox over a fence because it would not move. Her husband watched from the doorway and said nothing. He had married her knowing what she was. He had seen the tail on their wedding night and chosen to stay. Whether that makes him brave or foolish depends on how you feel about love and what you are willing to overlook in the people you choose to keep. The forests in Norway are still there. They are still deep and still quiet, and the light still goes green and then grey and then gone if you walk far enough in. But you are not in the forest. You are somewhere warm, somewhere with walls, and the trees are far away, and there is no one watching you from between the birches. Close your eyes. The next story is quieter still. In the Old North, before Christianity came, and for some time after, there was a practice. When a child was born that the family could not feed, a winter child, a sick child, a child born to a mother who already had too many, the father would take it out. He would carry it away from the farm, up onto the moor, or out to the edge of the lava field, and he would leave it there, in the cold, in the wind, and he would walk home. This was not cruelty. Not exactly. It was survival, in a place where survival was the only thing there was. A family with 5 mouths and food for 3 had a decision to make, and the decision was always the same, and it was always terrible, and the person who made it carried it for the rest of their life. The church eventually forbade it. The law eventually forbade it. But the Moors remembered. They say you can hear the children. At night, on the open ground, where the wind has nothing to break against, and the heather grows low and dark, you hear crying. Thin, high. The sound a very small child makes when it has been crying for a long time and has nearly stopped, but has not stopped yet. It comes from no direction, or from every direction. You turn your head, and it seems to come from the left. You turn again, and it is behind you. You walk toward it, and it moves, always just ahead, always just out of reach, always just far enough away that you take one more step. The travellers who followed the sound did not come home by the road they left on. They wandered. They circled. They walked into bogs and off cliffs and out onto thin ice, because the crying was always just there, just ahead, and they could not stop themselves from following it. Some were found days later, exhausted, miles from where they should have been, unable to explain how they had walked so far, or why they had not turned back. They said only that the crying would not let them stop. Others were not found at all. There is a version of the story that is worse than the wandering. In some tellings, a traveller hears the crying, and instead of following it, does what any decent person would do. He goes to it. He finds the child, or what looks like a child, lying in the heather, small and pale and shaking, and he picks it up. It is light at first, light as a bundle of rags. He wraps it in his coat and turns toward home and takes the first step. And with the second step, it is heavier. And with the third step, heavier still. The child grows, not in the way children grow, slowly, over years. This is something else. With every step the traveller takes, the weight on his back doubles. The bundle that was light as rags becomes the weight of a stone, then a barrel, then a grown man, then something heavier than any man could carry. And still he walks, because the crying has stopped now, and the silence is worse, and he cannot put the thing down, because it is holding on to him. Its fingers, which were so small when he picked it up, are longer now, stronger, wrapped around his shoulders and his neck, and locked there, with a grip that does not feel like a child's grip, and does not feel like a man's grip, and does not feel like anything he has ever felt before. He falls. They always fall. The weight is too much. The knees give. The ground comes up. And the thing on his back, which is no longer small, no longer pale, no longer anything like a child, the thing on his back does not let go. In the morning, they find him on the moor, face down, fingers dug into the earth. Nothing on his back. No child. No weight. Just the bruises on his shoulders, where something held on, and the look on his face of a man who carried something that should not have been picked up. The hardest part of this story is not the ghost. The hardest part is the silence of the father, walking home across the moor, with his arms empty, and the wind at his back. The ghost came after. The ghost is the story the moor tells about what happened on it. But the thing that happened, the real thing, the human thing, that was just a man, and a child, and the cold. The Old North did not look away from this. They did not pretend the moors were empty. They said, "We did this thing, and the land remembers, and at night you can hear what the land remembers if you listen. If you listen. But you do not need to listen tonight. The moor is far from here. The wind is someone else's wind. The crying, if it was ever real, is centuries old now and has nothing to do with you. Let it go. Let the moor be quiet." The next story comes from the sea, and the sea is gentler than the moor, and the night is gentler still. The Norwegians have a saying about the sea. The sea gives, and the sea takes, and the sea does not explain itself. Along the northern coast of Norway, where the mountains fall straight into the water, and the fishing villages sit in the cracks between them like teeth in a jaw, the sea was everything. It fed you. It carried you. It killed your father, and your brother, and your son. And you went back out on it the next morning, because there was nothing else. The women stood on the shore and watched the boats go out, and stood on the shore and watched them come back, and counted. Always counting. How many left? How many returned? Whether the numbers matched. They did not always match. And the ones who did not come back, the drowned, the lost, the ones taken by a wave or a storm or a current that turned without warning, they did not always stay gone. The fisherman called him the drowned man. He appeared at sea, always at sea, usually at dusk, or in fog, or in that strange flat light before a storm, when the water and the sky are the same colour, and you cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. He rowed a half-boat, a boat broken in two, just the front half, or just the back half. The stories disagree on which, but they agree on this. It was half a vessel, sheared clean as if something had bitten through the keel, and it should not have floated. And it did not float, in the way that boats float. It sat on the water rather than in it, gliding, moving without wake, and the man who rowed it was not a man. He had the shape of one, the size of one. He wore oilskins, and his hands gripped the oars, and he pulled them through the water with the steady rhythm of someone who has been rowing for a very, very long time. But his skin was the colour of the underside of a fish, grey-white, bloated, shining faintly in the flat light. And his hair was not hair. It was seaweed. Long strands of it, dark and wet, hanging over his face and trailing in the water behind him like a net. He did not speak. In some tellings, he screamed, a long, thin cry that carried across the water the way a gull's cry carries, except that it did not end, and it did not sound like a gull. And the fisherman who heard it said it sounded like a man who was drowning but could not finish drowning. Caught in the moment of it, held there. In other tellings, he was silent, and the silence was worse, because when he screamed, you knew where he was. When he was silent, you only knew he was close. Seeing the drowned man meant one thing: you were going to die at sea. Not today necessarily, not on this voyage, but soon. The next trip, or the one after that. The drowned man was not a killer. He did not capsize boats or summon storms. He was a sign, a message from the water that the water had already decided and was simply letting you know. Some fishermen, when they saw him, turned their boats around and never went to sea again. They became farmers, or woodcutters, or drunks in the village tavern who stared at the harbour and would not say why. Others saw him and went out anyway, because the fish were still there and the family was still hungry. And a man who has been told he will die at sea, but has no other way to live, does the only thing he can do. He rows out. He throws the net. He watches the horizon. And one day, the sea collects what it promised to collect. There is a story they tell in the fishing villages about a woman who saw the drowned man from the shore. Her husband was out on the water. She was standing on the rocks above the harbour, watching the boats come in through the fog, counting the masts as they appeared. And between two of the boats, in the grey space between them, where the fog was thickest, she saw the half-boat. She saw the figure in it, rowing slowly, head down, seaweed trailing. And the half-boat was keeping pace with her husband's vessel, matching it, sailing alongside it, like a shadow. She did not tell him. He came home that evening, and she fed him, and she sat with him by the fire, and she said nothing. What would she say? I saw your death today. It was rowing next to you. It looked patient. He went out the next morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. She stood on the rocks and watched and counted, and he always came back, and the half-boat was not there. And she began to think, maybe she had imagined it. He drowned in November. A squall came up fast, the way they do on that coast, and his boat went over, and the water took him. They found the boat. They did not find him. She stood on the rocks that evening and watched the empty harbour and the fog coming in, and she did not cry. She had done her crying months ago, on the day she saw the half-boat. The grief was already old. She had been mourning him since the summer. The sea gives, and the sea takes, and the sea does not explain itself. But sometimes, if if you are watching, it shows you what it intends. The drowned man is still out there, if you believe the fisherman, rowing his half-boat through the fog. Patient, unhurried, not malicious, just certain. But you are not at sea. The water is far from here, and the fog is someone else's fog, and no one is counting the boats tonight. Rest now. We have one more story. The last one. The gentlest one. And then the dark is yours. And you can sleep. Our last story tonight is not quite like the others. The others were about the dead, and the drowned, and the things that wait in forests and on moors. Those stories asked you to be afraid. This one asks you to be good. In the mountains of Iceland, in the high country, above the farms, above the pastures, in the place where the rock turns black and the snow never quite melts, there lives an ogress. She has lived there for as long as anyone can remember, and longer than that. She was old when the sagas were young. She was old when the first farmers built the first turf houses in the valleys below her mountain, and looked up at the peaks and told their children not to wander. She is enormous, taller than a house, broader than a barn door. Her face is the colour of old leather, and her teeth are the colour of old bone. And her eyes are the worst part, because they are clever. Not animal clever, not cunning in the way a fox is cunning, clever like a person who has been watching people for 1,000 years and knows exactly what they are. She has a nose like a cliff face, and that nose can smell something very specific. She can smell a child who has misbehaved. Not a child who has done something wrong once, or forgotten a chore, or argued with a sibling. She can smell the other kind, the persistent kind, the child who lies for the pleasure of it, or steals from the neighbour's stores, or is cruel to animals, or does not come inside when called. The child whose meanness has settled in, like damp in a wall. She smells them on the wind, the way a dog smells a rabbit. And in the weeks before Christmas, when the dark is longest and the mountain paths freeze solid enough to walk on, she comes down. She carries a sack, an enormous sack, stitched from hides, slung over her shoulder. She walks the valleys at night, slowly, because she does not need to hurry. She has all winter. She stops outside each farm, and she lifts that terrible nose, and she breathes in. If the children inside have been good, genuinely good, not just quiet out of fear, she moves on. Her footsteps crunch in the snow outside the window and fade into the distance, and the children sleep through it and never know how close she came. If the children have not been good, she opens the door. She takes them. She puts them in the sack, and she carries them up the mountain, back to her cave, where a great iron pot sits over a fire that has been burning since before anyone can remember. And she cooks them in a stew, with root vegetables and wild herbs, and whatever else an ogress keeps in her larder. That is the story Icelandic parents told their children for centuries. Behave, or the mountain woman will smell you. And it worked. Because children are practical creatures, and the logic of it is airtight. But the ogress is not alone in her cave. She has a husband. Her third husband, in fact. The first two did not work out, though the stories do not say why, and one can only imagine. The third is a large, slow, thoroughly useless man who sits by the fire and does nothing useful, and has apparently been doing nothing useful for several hundred years. She keeps him anyway. Why, no one knows. Perhaps even an ogress does not like an empty cave. And she has sons. 13 of them. The Yule lads. They come down from the mountain one by one in the 13 nights before Christmas. Each one has a name that describes what he does. And what they do is irritate people. One steals sausages. Another licks spoons. A third slams doors in the night. One peers through windows. One steals candles. One scrapes the bottom of your cooking pot when you're not looking. They are not dangerous. They are annoying. Profoundly, specifically, relentlessly annoying. In the way that only the sons of a child-eating ogress and a man who does nothing could possibly be. And then there is the cat, the Christmas cat. The ogress has a cat the size of a horse that lives on the mountain with her. And the Christmas cat has one rule. If you have not received at least one piece of new clothing before Christmas Eve, a scarf, a pair of socks, a hat, anything, the cat will come for you. Not to eat you exactly. Well, no, actually, yes, to eat you. The Christmas cat eats people who did not get new clothes. That is the rule. It does not have to make sense. It is a rule made by a cat the size of a horse, who lives in a cave with a cannibal ogress and 13 irritating brothers. Sense was never part of the arrangement. The effect, of course, was that every family in Iceland made absolutely sure that every member of the household received at least one new garment before Christmas. Even the poorest. Even the servants. A pair of knitted socks was enough. The cat was not fussy about quality. It was fussy about effort. There is something almost gentle about that. Underneath the child eating and the sausage stealing and the horse-sized cat, the story is really about this. In the darkest weeks of the year, in a country where the dark lasted months, take care of each other. Make something for someone. Knit the socks. Close the door against the cold. Feed the children. Even the difficult ones. Especially the difficult ones. The ogress is still up there, if you believe the stories. In her cave, by her fire, with her useless husband and her 13 terrible sons, and her enormous, clothes-obsessed cat, waiting for the dark to come back around. And now we are done. 7 stories. 7 pieces of the old dark, carried down from a time when the dark was the only neighbour, and people told stories into it, the way you throw a stone into a well, not to fill it, but to hear how deep it goes. The dead Deacon riding under the moon. The strong man cursed to fear the dark. The fiddler whose music pulls you into the water. The woman in the forest who is hollow behind her beauty. The crying on the moor that will not stop. The drowned man rowing his half-boat through the fog. and the Ogress in the mountain, who smells your sins on the wind and comes for you with a sack. They told these stories because the winter was long and the silence was heavy, and a dark that has something in it, even something terrible, is less frightening than a dark that is empty. Your dark is not empty now. We have filled it with old things, cold things, things with teeth and tails and seaweed hair. But they are only stories. They live in the telling, and they die in the silence after. Your door is locked. Your roof is still. The water is far away, and the forest is far away, and the moor is far away, and the mountain is far away. You are here. You are warm. You are safe. And there is no hurry at all.